Welcome to, oh my goodness, I didn't change this. This is actually week 2 of the Teen Services 101 program. I'm happy that you guys are all here. My name is Sharon Colvin, and I'm running this crazy thing. So last week we talked a lot about scope, and we talked about what the scope of your position is, what the scope of teen services is, what kind of resources you have, and kind of what the situation is as a whole. So this week, we're going to be digging in a little bit deeper, and we are going to talk about collections. So if we take a look at this, all right. I love this right here. There's this new program out there. It's been all over social media called the 5-Minute Librarian. And it says, want to be a teen librarian? Rule number 1, whip your collection into shape. And I think that's really good because teen collections need to be really current, and they need to be really uncluttered so that they can show off the pretty titles and the covers, because those covers are quite spectacular sometimes. And kids have no patience for piles and piles of junk everywhere. So it's important to keep your area neat and clean. And also because teens are a very specific age group, you have to be able to really define what your age group is. And we talked a little bit about that last week. All right, so how the heck do you pick your materials? So first, I want to talk a little bit about what kind of materials you have in your teen section, or what kind of materials you want to have in your section. So this is your time to unmute yourself and talk. Or Sarah, you can type. So what do you have in your collection besides books? Everyone has books out.
Here at the Fletcher we have DVDs.
Magazines, great. Anyone have graphic novels?
Yep, we have those.
Yes.
Perfect. And manga?
Yep.
Yeah.
Lovely. Does anyone have music? Music's kind of going out of vogue. But sometimes, no. Does anyone check out video games?
We check out video games, but it's not specifically to the teenagers.
Okay. Understandable. Cool. All right. So
how much manga do people carry? Because the high school tends to have a huge selection.
That's a good question. Manga, have you guys noticed that some of these series go on and on and on and on? I think there's 60 volumes in Bleach now. It's really, really hard to keep up. So what do you guys do? Do you have a lot of manga?
I have only a few just.
Okay. Just a few. It's hard to keep up. Hopefully, we can work together with the libraries nearby and with interlibrary loan. That tends to help a little bit, because kids will read through the entire series and then move on to something else, and then your shelves start to explode. So you can buy the first 5 in a series. You can buy just the newest ones. How do you figure out what series to go for? Manga is probably one of the hardest things to buy.
I would take some suggestions of what series to get. I just have one, and I can't even think of what one I have.
That's okay. That would be my best advice, is to ask the kids. And the kids are funny. They may start asking for things that you already own, but it's important to ask them what's popular, what do they want. Sometimes you can ask about the anime they watch, and if they have graphic novels, or vice versa. If there are graphic novels, anime for their graphic novels, that can help you. But manga, I find, is just too broad a subject, and we don't have a lot of local experts. graphic novels, like Thad was saying, he has a bunch of graphic novels, only a few manga. I never had a lot of luck with the graphic novels in the libraries I worked in. So you really need to know your audience. Graphic novels tend to be reviewed in these sources that are on the screen right now. So you'll see graphic novels that get starred reviews in School Library Journal or Hornbook. Those kinds of books never circulated in my libraries where I worked. They might circulate in yours. It really just depends. And then there's the other question of where do you shelve them? Some of them belong in children, some of them belong in teens, some of them belong in adult. I was just down in Waterbury and I was talking to the librarian there, and they're doing a big move because they have a new building. So she's really thinking critically about her collections. And one of the things I was talking to her about was some of the more mature graphic novels in her collection. And I said, do you have an adult graphic novel collection? And she said, no. And she wasn't really interested in creating one, which I totally understand because who needs another sub-collection? But things like blankets, which can be a little risque for teens, and you can get you into some trouble with, well, not trouble, but it can get you some complaints from people. It's worth thinking about. Do you want to just stick it in with the fiction, with the adult? Do you want to just take the risk and bring on the challenges and keep it in teen? It's really up to you. So let's look at some of these other sources that people use for picking books. These were the things that came up in the discussion. I remind you guys, everyone needs to post in that discussion by the end of the day. So if you haven't done it, get on that. These are some of the things that came up. And I was surprised that more journals didn't come up. Do you guys all know that you can borrow journals from the Department of Libraries? We subscribe to everything, and I look at them for about 5 minutes and then put them in the collection, and they're completely borrowable. And if you have any questions, just call Interlibrary Loan. They'll be happy to send you whatever issues you want. We get everything. We get Hornbook, we get Voya, School Library Journal, Book List. We get everything. And we're more than happy to send you whatever you need. These are expensive publications. So if you need to cut back on your expenses, but you still want to use these resources, absolutely lean on us. We're happy to do it. I was happy to see that some other resources came up in the discussion, though. So these are the standard, like, typical library things. They cost a lot of money, and they are the quote official reviews in the field, right? But I was happy to see that some of you guys use Barnes & Noble and Amazon as selection tools, and I have to say that I always use Amazon for a selection tool. If you go to like the hot lists or to the new releases, sometimes that's where you're going to find out about sequels to books that aren't going to get starred reviews because, the sequel to the new James Patterson just isn't that good. But the kids love it and they want it. So that's how I used to keep up with sequels, is I would keep looking at the Amazon, new publications or the hot new books, and I would look in teen and in children because there's often overlap, and that would help me keep up with what was being published, because it's so hard to keep up. And then, of course, I do videos every week to kind of help you guys keep up with some of this stuff. But sometimes those really popular, cheap little sequels, it's just hard. It's hard to know, that Aaron Hunter has a new book, because I get tired of them and I'm not going to tell you about them. So you have to figure it out. So these are totally legitimate sources. Another one that didn't come up that I want to encourage you to use is Teen Reads. Does anyone look at Teen Reads? Nobody. All right, well, let me show you Teen Reads really quickly. It's one of my favorite sources for teen reviews. So it's teenreads.com. They fairly recently revamped their website. There's a lot of tools here, so it can be a little bit overwhelming. The things that I like, if you scroll down a little bit, there's this one called Cool and New Books. And if you go here, well, it's of course going to take 10 years to load because you guys are staring at it. Isn't that always the case? The the more people who stare at it, the slower it goes. There you go. All right, so every month they put out cool and new books, and if you click on it, what it'll do is they go through cool books, and they give I like their reviews. They're just kind of to the point, and they look at all kinds of books, and this is another place where I'll see authors, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know Becca Fitzpatrick had a new book coming out. That's awesome.
Sharon?
Yeah.
I just wanted to let you know I'm in. I'm a little bit late. I had trouble getting online.
No worries. I will update the attendance sheet at the end. No worries.
All right. Sorry.
No problem. So this is Teen Reads, and if you go through every month, they go through some hot new books. Now, of course, not every book is perfect for your library, but sometimes you'll see things that are either authors that you love, authors that your kids love, or you'll see things that are like, ooh, I really like that. Or if you're like me, you grew up reading Christopher Pike, and you're like, wow, he's still writing? Who knew? Anyway, so I know he's been writing for a gazillion years. So you're going to see some sequels, like this is the sequel to The Fifth Wave. You'll see some interesting covers. And so every month they do this. Did you know Wes Moore has a new book? Ooh. So that's a good way, and I like the visual. I like just like glancing at the covers. I never had time to read a lot of reviews. I'm completely guilty of skimming reviews, and I'll tend to read like the last 2 sentences, and that's it. So, but I was working in a big library and ordering a lot of books. So it really just kind of depends. Sometimes you'll find like Twitter chats here and interviews with different authors that your kids might be interested in, and they'll highlight certain books that come out, like Walter Dean Myers has a new book that came out. It must have been one of the last books he wrote before he passed away. There's also a blog over here. They do some contests sometimes, and they'll even like show you some of the latest reviews. There is an ultimate reading list. I don't know. I think that every library is different, so it's up to you. But if you're a visual person and if you like to skim, what's coming up next, and you kind of have a sense of what your kids are into, this is a decent resource for that. So I would recommend that you take a look at it. Of course, everyone has a different style, so it's completely up to you. All right, so there's a lot of different places to look for materials, right? So there's also blogs. There are a ton of blogs out there. I just showed you one, and then this is one. School Library Journal has a blog roll, and I'm going to send you all these links, so don't worry. These are the School Library Journal blogs, and some of them might speak to you. The one that everyone talks about is A Chair, a Fireplace, and a Tea Cozy. This is one that might be interesting to you. I don't tend to have a lot of patience for like these chatty blogs. I rather just kind of tell me what the books are so I can move on. But it's up to you. There's also one about comics for kids, and it's got a lot of different contributors, which is worth looking at. However, I'm going to show you my favorite one, No Flying, No Tights. Have any of you guys ever looked at this site, No Flying, No Tights? Okay. Well, it is a fantastic resource. It was started by my friend Robin Brenner. She works in the Brookline Library in Massachusetts, and she is like the reigning queen of graphic novels and manga. And she has an entire staff now of people reviewing this stuff. So if you need kind of the lowdown on what's being published in the world of graphic novels and manga, this is the place to go. And it's got a fabulous name, right? No Flying, No Tights. Her kids helped her come up with it. She does continuing education workshops too. There's a little primer on Comics 101. There's resources. She breaks it up into kids and teens and adults, so she can help you with where to put things. So if you're starting a graphic novel collection, or if you want to take a look to see what's out there, I would highly recommend taking a look at this. at this website. I think it has a ton of really good resources for you. And then over here, she's got this new section of staff picks. And then if you're looking for things for different age ranges, they have them for you. And you can also sign up for the RSS feed. So there you go. All right, what other blogs do you guys like? I will add them. Ooh, I hear a really bad echo.
My goodness.
Can you mute yourself if you're not talking? Just hit the green microphone and it'll turn red. And then we won't hear 800 of Sharon. I think it's better. Okay, cool. So what other blogs do we have? Diamond Book Distributors. I've never heard of that one. Whoa. I don't know what the echo's about. Diamond Book Distributors. Let's look at that. I hate that Firefox uses Yahoo search. Oh, cool. All right, so that's one that looks pretty good. I'll put that on the list as well. Anyone else use any blogs? I think, Sasha, did you list some blogs on your discussion?
I did, and now I can't remember what they were.
That's okay. That's okay.
Let me go check. Hold on a second.
That's fine. Well, these are some good ones to start with. Blogs are a really good way to keep up on, what's new and hip. Every review source has its problems, though, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, because reviewers are human, right? And has anyone here ever written a review for a blog or for a professional publication before? I have never done it, and part of my reason for that is because I just think there's so much complexity involved. There's so much context involved for reviewing a book. And it's like, well, it's an okay book if, or it's a good book for this particular person or that particular person. I have a lot of trouble with that. But the thing with book reviewers is they're human. So if you're having a bad day and you write one review, or if you particularly don't like this style of book, we all have our favorite genres, right? And I hate fantasy. I just can't stand fantasy. I read it because I have to, but it's not my favorite. And so if I review a fantasy book, it's going to be very biased because I'm not a fantasy person. On the other hand, I love historical fiction. So if I review a historical fiction book, it's going to be all glowy and happy because I love historical fiction. The other inherent problem with book reviews for kids is we're grown-ups. These books are not supposed to be for us. The books are supposed to be for the kids. And so that's a problem of the children's book industry in general. So we have adults writing the books. We have adults publishing the books. We have adults distributing the books and reviewing the books. And we have adults buying the books. And so we have to take that into consideration too when you're reading a review. Now, I'm not saying you have to read every review ever published because that's impossible. But there's some things to consider. So when you're reading reviews, you want to think about who is the reviewer. If you read something like School Library Journal, Hornbook, Library Journal, what's the other one? Voya. Those are all librarians who are writing those reviews. Oh, here, Sasha's got her one. Read, Breathe, Relax. Oh, I don't know that one. One of my friends has a blog called I Read to Relax. This one must be different. Breathe, Breathe, Relax. Sasha, it says it doesn't work. Oh, wait. It must be breathe, not breath. Yeah, got it. Cool. Ooh, that looks like a nice one. All right, I'll put this on our list too. All right, I will send this all to you guys so you have them all to look at. All right, so you want to take into consideration who's writing them. So in those library journals, those are librarians writing them. They're no better or worse than you or me. They work with kids. They are trying their best to help their peers decide what to buy. They might be in a small library. They might be in a big library. They might be in an urban library. They might be in a rural library. But ultimately, the thing to consider is it's one person's opinion. It's not a committee. It's not like, the GMBA awards where there's like 12 of us making a decision. It's one person. One person read that book and wrote the review. And if you look at a review source like Voya, some of those reviews are written by teens, which has its pluses and minuses. Teens aren't always the best writers. Some of them are amazing, though. And sometimes they're more critical. Sometimes they're less critical. It really depends. But honestly, they're the audience. So it's interesting to have their point of view. However, they're also just one kid, and they might not be the kind of kid who comes into your library. So you really want to think about that when you're reading reviews. And you don't want to take their words as gospel. Just because something doesn't get a great review doesn't mean it's not a great book for your library. When you read through a review, especially on a blog, you really want to think about, is it unbiased? Is it thorough? Is it just kind of did they even read it? Sometimes I am totally guilty of this. When I do my videos, I have not read the books when I go through the novels because I don't have time. But then I have another one that's called What is Sharon Reading? And those I have read. So, sometimes my opinion is drastically different from my first review when I'm just looking at the other reviews of people and looking at the cover and saying, ooh, this looks like an awesome book. And then I read it and I'm like, this book's terrible. So, it just depends. So make sure that you keep that in mind. You want to look at what else are they reviewing. So if you have a journal or, something, so take Publishers Weekly, for example. I don't think those are librarians doing those reviews. I think those are publishing people. So they're a little different. Same thing as the New York Times book reviews. Those are not librarians. So they have a different spin on things. So they're writing to a different audience. And again, it might be better, it might be worse. But look at what else they review. So Publishers Weekly reviews everything. They review everything ever published. So they don't have a focus. Same thing with Booklist. They review everything. And then you have something like School Library Journal, which is more focused. First, it's a little bit easier to get through because it's all children's stuff all the time. School Library Journal also does videos and apps and educational resources and reference material as well, which can be helpful. And then places like Voya is even more narrow. So they only review teen stuff, so nothing below junior high. So those are things to consider when you're looking at a review. Everyone has their favorites. I always make fun of Kirkus. Kirkus has the bizarre reviews. I think they're really weird. They tend to be the ones that give starred reviews to things that no one else likes, which, that's fine. And then if you read Hornbook, they tend to only publish the positive reviews, which I kind of like, because if I'm in a hurry, I know that everything in Hornbook is good. But then School Library Journal has started publishing kind of some harsh reviews. They have, I was telling you in the beginning, sometimes I only read the last two sentences. And sometimes those last two sentences are harsh. They're things like, well, for a better book, you should look over here. Or there are better books out there. Skip this one. And I find this hilarious. So, I think it's helpful to know which books are skippable. So Sarah says one challenge with the New York Times book review is that often that's what the public knows about, and it can be how they read the pulse of what you should have. That is a really, really good point. One of the reasons for staying on top of the popular media, like the New York Times book review, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, is because that's what people are looking for. And if you're a library director or if you buy books for all parts of the library, you should be keeping up with things like Oprah and what's on Facebook and what's getting advertised in magazines. Keep in mind those things because that's how people are going to hear about it. And it's true, they're going to come and demand that you have those books. Kids are a little bit different. They don't care about the New York Times book review. They care if it's cool. And Thad, you're absolutely right. Judging a book by its cover, I think is perfectly fine when you're dealing with teenagers. Because if it doesn't look cool, they're not going to pick it up. And sometimes it means waiting for the paperback. And a really good example of that is this year's Canfield Fisher list. There's a book on it called 7 Stories Up. And the original hardcover cover is horrible. It looks like 2 kids in a mental institution, like trying to escape. But the paperback cover is really pretty, has a Ferris wheel on it, and the kids will love it. So it's important to take that into consideration because your kids, like, I don't know about you, but I've never met a kid who wanted to be seen with a library-bound book. There's something about library-bound books that it just screams geeky. And so they would much rather have a hardcover or a paperback to carry around and be seen with because they don't want to be seen as a nerd. So it does matter. It really does. And sometimes you can kind of guess what type of kid is going to be interested in it just by glancing at the cover. Because you can tell. You all know books. You're going to be able to tell which one's the romance, which one's the science fiction, which one's the horror based on the cover because they're trying to sell it to the reader. Yeah, so Renee is talking about the differences in covers for the same book. It's so true. And authors don't get to pick the covers on their books. So sometimes there are really, really weird choices being made. Some of them are really, really bad. And some of them are great. And then I was talking to Nancy Garden about this back like 10, 15 years ago. And she was saying that when they released the 20th anniversary of Annie on My Mind, she was so excited about the new book cover because they'd finally updated it. And it finally had a photograph on it instead of a drawing. So back in the olden days, there were more drawings on book covers, and now there's more photographs. So she was really excited about that. So sometimes it's worth thinking about. I was talking to someone recently about those classic books you have. Now, there aren't that many when in the teens, because let's face it, they don't care about nostalgia. But some books are perennial favorites, like Orson Scott Card, for example. If you have a copy of Ender's Game, when they come out with new covers, like I think they had a new cover for the movie, it might be worth thinking about whether or not you want to buy a new one, because it might give your book a little bit more life. Covers do matter. It's sad, but true. Kids are getting more and more visual, and they're very savvy when it comes to images. And so they want a book that speaks to them, and the cover matters. However, I will say that sometimes my best book talks are books that have really terrible covers, and I'll bring them in to the schools and say, oh my gosh, this cover is terrible. And then I've seen librarians who do cover contests. I've seen people who do, the blind date with a book. I think they did that in Colchester, and she did it with really ugly books to see if she could get the kids to read them. So there are things you can do, but it's definitely worth thinking about. So book awards. How many of you guys keep an eye on the book awards, the ALA book awards every year?
I do.
Good.
I do too.
It's definitely, that's one of those things that people are going to ask about. Now, the ones that people are going to ask about the most, okay, Sarah's a book award lover. I always watch the ceremony every year. It's really fun. It's usually on in the morning, so you can like stream it from work if you're lucky. So the Newbery Award is something to keep an eye on. The Caldecott is also something. And then when you come to the Teen Book Awards is when I start getting disappointed. And that's the Prince. Does anyone here have any opinions on the Prince Award? Because I do. Anyone? No? Okay.
It seems like they pick weird choices or not real popular choices with kids.
Yes! Yes! I hate the Prince books. They never get checked out. Thank you, Thad. And I was always so irked because I felt like I had to buy them because they were Prince winners, but then I'd have to weed them a year later because nobody read them because they were so obscure and weird. And yeah, I get really frustrated, especially since when the Prince started, they were giving out the award to really good books, and now it's just weird. So there are other lists to look at. Did everyone see my post? I think it was last week. The Teens Top 10 got posted. I put it on Facebook, but I'll send it to you here again. The Teens Top 10 is a teen voted book award. It tends to be a little random, I have to admit, but I think it gives you a little better sense of what's hot, and it's definitely better than the Prince winners, quite honestly. So let me put that one here too. There's also something about called the best books for young adults, and that list comes out once a year. And let me show you that one too. It's called Best Books EFYA. I think that's what it's called. Best Fictions for Young Adults. Yeah. This list comes out once a year. It's a long list. But it's something, it usually comes out at the end of the year. So if you're doing retroactive kind of book selection, so they'll do the top 10 definitely, but the long list is long. However, what I used to do, and it depends on how big your collection is at the end of the year, you see how they asterisk the ones that are the top 10? At the end of the year, I would go through this list and just make sure I owned the ones that are starred and make sure I own most of these. So you'll see a lot of books on here that your kids probably love already. Afterworld is on here, and Crossovers on here. Egg and Spoon is on here. It's a really wide range. Jacoby, Revolution. There's just a lot of books on here. So it's worth checking it out. And this is a committee. So this list and all the awards actually are decided by committee. So it's not one person and their biases. It's actually a committee. I think it's about 10 or 15 people, and they have to go through an application process, and it's a ton of work. And they select this list specifically for us for collection development. So that's another resource. So then we have the Vermont. Wow, it sounded like a plane is taking off in one of you guys. Is one of you guys flying a plane? All right, so the annual Vermont Book Awards are right here, of course. And the Green Mountain Book Award is being revitalized right now. And I'm hoping that this year's list will be the best list ever.
Karen?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, where did you get the Teen Top thing? I'm on the website and I just couldn't find it after.
Teens Top 10?
Yeah. To get the books.
Let's see. It might be a video. It's right here.
Oh, okay, so I pushed that one. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You bet. And then they have book trailers of some of the nominees. I know. It's pretty crazy. So there's a lot of different resources out there. But the one thing I want to make you aware of, because this is going to be part of your homework, is I want you to be aware of the pros and cons of these lists. So things that are chosen by committee tend to be a little bit, I don't know, more well-rounded. Things that are selected by one person or described by one person can have some definite drawbacks. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means it's something to think about. Let's see what we have here. We've got some people talking. Oh, yeah, Spooky Moses. Sarah says she changed where the award book are displayed and made some fresh posters. And because the books are near my desk, I can get excited and talk about them and increase circulation. That's a great idea. So one thing that people talk about in teen services is whether or not to put the stickers on the books. I was always anti-sticker. It really depends on your population, but the kids in my libraries thought it was dorky to have a sticker, like a metal sticker, on their books, so I didn't put the Prince or Newberry's or National Book Award stickers, the medals, on their books. It depends on your kids. It really, really does. Some kids are cool with it. Some kids aren't. Of course, you're going to put them on the GMBA books, but those stickers are cool. Or at least they are now. No more disembodied hand. But the medals tend to be for the parents. The adults are the ones that are impressed by the medals. The kids, not so much. So it's something to think about. So moving on from that, the next question is weeding. Weeding the teen area is so important. And I love this little guy on the left. You see this? Because this is what people say all the time. Why are you getting rid of books? Because your shelves look like this. This is crazy pants. And kids can't get to them. They can't find what they need. Things are getting buried. You can't see the covers. And honestly, especially in the teen area, your teen area should be the easiest section to weed, because teens are not nostalgic. They don't care what you read when you were a kid. They really don't. They don't care what was popular last year. All they want is what's popular now. And so that's why it's really important to keep up with what's being published and what's new and keep on top of those trends. But you don't need to keep the old stuff. So for example, when I was a kid, Cynthia Voigt was huge. Now, if you own one Cynthia Voigt book, it's probably enough. And that's only if your community is into that kind of thing. Sometimes you'll have teachers that, require or recommend certain authors, and it's important to keep those. But you don't need to keep a lot of the really old stuff. So old Christopher Pike, and you don't need to keep, the old, goofy stuff. V.C. Andrews, oh my gosh, Wendy, you're so right. V.C. Andrews was huge when I was in high school. Although as a librarian, I'm not sure I would put it on the YA shelf. I don't know. The whole incest and rape thing, that was pretty intense. Right, Renee made a really good point. You want to be inviting to teens, and you want them to ask questions, definitely. So you want to talk to your teens about what they want, what kinds of stuff they're interested in, and especially if you have a limited space, you want to talk to them about what they like so that you can buy those sequels and you don't fill your shelves up with things that never move. Also, remember that if you have prettier shelves that have more space in between them where you can actually turn some of the books around and see the covers, those books will circulate more because it's like they're self-advertising. It's important to do that. So it's going to be really important to go through your collection at least once a year and really pull out anything ugly. And that will take you no time at all. Just go through, pull out anything ugly, and then think about whether you want to replace it or whether you want to get rid of it. It really, really depends. Paige says she finds some of her books haven't quite reached a certain popularity level yet. Some of them are too new, if that makes sense. Like the Maze Runner books are really popular now, but they were published a while ago. That's a good point. For weeding, how do we know what is going to be the next movie or blockbuster YA hit when sometimes it takes a while for the new books to become popular books? It's a really, really good question. It depends on your kids. Sometimes, if kids are driven by what movies are coming out, you want to keep an eye on what books are being made into movies. You always want to keep an eye on that because whenever they release a new movie that's being made out of a book, that book is going to be in high demand. You don't want to get rid of that book while that movie is being made. And Maze Runner was made into a movie recently. And then you want to keep an eye on what these kids are reading and what they're interested in. Sometimes there is a lag, sometimes there's not. And you can definitely look into what movies are coming out in the future. And Thad is dying to weed Twilight. Yeah, I felt like that about the Gossip Girl series. Gossip Girl drove me crazy, and it took me years to be able to weed it. So in a series like that, you're probably never going to be able to get rid of the first Twilight. But you may be able to weed the rest of them. It really depends on your circulation. If they're not going out, then I think fair to get rid of them, especially that last book. I feel like that last book didn't have a lot of pull with the teens. So you might consider getting rid of the end of the series. I would not get rid of the first one until there's absolutely no interest at all. The authors' websites are really good places to go. Do you know that you guys can friend authors on Facebook too? It's important to, if you have your favorite authors, a way you can keep up with them. You can also keep an eye on my Facebook page and on the Roundtable page if you need it. If you're not already on it, because I post updates about these kinds of things. Movies that are coming out, sequels that are coming out, authors that are doing talks, things like that. Oh, right, the reverse gender Twilight. Oh my gosh. Has anyone bought that one? What is it even called? I don't remember. Now you're going to make me look it up, aren't you? Yeah. You guys are so mean. Okay, let's see. The reverse gender Twilight. Twilight. What's it called? Usually Amazon's so good with this. Not today. It's not finding it. Here. Oh, is it Life and Death? Is that the one? That might be it. Life and Death. Yeah, okay. I don't know. I feel like that book is it's a spoof. She's spoofing herself, right? So okay, here's my guess. Only adults are going to read this, and only snarky adults who are really into that kind of thing. So if you have those kinds of people in your library, you might want to stick it in the adult section. I really doubt teens care. It's been a while since Twilight came out. It's been, 10 years? I really doubt teens care anymore. Yeah, only 3 stars. So one of the things about reviews, if you look at Voya gives 2 different kinds of reviews. They give popularity and quality. And quality is, the writing quality. So let's say the original Twilight, for example, might have gotten a 2 in quality out of 5. But in popularity, it would have gotten a 5 because that is how popular it is. So sometimes you have to think about, sometimes you have to buy things that aren't that well written, Nicholas Sparks, and because it's going to be really popular, right? You can't be a quality snob, unfortunately. And then sometimes you'll have things that are really, really high quality that are never going to go out. And that would be like one of those Prince books. Yes, it's literary merit going through the roof, definitely, but are the kids ever going to read it? And those are the things you really want to be careful of, because sometimes, the reviewers aren't taking those both things into consideration. Pre-production movies, there's isn't there a website for that? I'm trying to think. I want to say there are a couple of blogs out there. Is it Pop Sugar? I don't remember. But it might be worth it. I mean, I can definitely post these things as they come through the social media. But it might be something that you just do a quick Google search on. Amazon sometimes will tell you these things. IMDb will sometimes tell you what's coming out soon. It looks like the blog that Sasha was telling us about had an article about, a lot of blogs will put these together, but they'll be once a year. and they'll have little articles like this. And this is one of those things that I want to recommend to all of you. If you're on social media, these are the things to share with us. Share with your fellow librarians, and I share them when I see them, but of course I can't see everything. But these are the things that you should post in the roundtables. I have a young adult book discussion group called Grown Up Teens that I am happy to add you to, and post these kinds of things, and that way we know what's coming up. It's really, I think, worth, this is exactly what social media is for, is sharing these kinds of things. So these will come up every once in a while. And sometimes what'll happen is that the books will go straight to the movies will go straight to video, and then it has less of an impact. There was one recently that was announced, and now I can't remember what it was. That's going straight to video, and I was like, oh, well, I guess that one doesn't matter anymore. Okay, so before we run out of time, there's a couple other things I want you guys to think about. This week, I really want you guys to firm up your age ranges for your collection. It doesn't have to be for programming. Programming we'll talk about next week. For collections, and it's totally fine if your collection and your programming have different age ranges. That's completely okay. But I want you to firm up the age range for your collection. Now, that doesn't mean that other ages can't read that collection, but I want you to think about who are you buying for specifically, okay? And then I want you to think about the overlap between where does children's end, where does adult begin, and this goes for all the different types of materials that you're collecting. So books, magazines, graphic novels. I want you to think about, like, what are the rules? Like, so if you have, let's say, movies, do you only put PG-13 in teen? How do you decide what goes in there? Same thing with magazines. How do you decide where they're going to go? And that is a really good point. Books that are for 10 and up are really hard to place. And that's why I really want you guys to firm up your age range. Sometimes there's an appeal factor. And I was talking to someone about this recently. So books like, and there's also the series factor. So first let's talk about the appeal factor. So things like, for example, Pendragon or Aragon. Aragon, Pendragon, those books could go in the children's section. They could go in YA. It really depends on your kids and the appeal. If you have a lot of hardcore fantasy readers, they're in the children's room, that's cool. If you don't, you could put them in YA. One of the things you want to think about is, are your children going to be uncomfortable going into the YA section? Are your teens going to be uncomfortable going into the children's section? Sometimes it's kind of cool to go up into the teen section when you're only 10. Sometimes if it's geographically far away, then it might be, the parents might be a little uncomfortable with that. But sometimes it's kind of embarrassing for the teens to have to go into the children's section. So I want you to think about that. The other thing to think about is your series. So I was talking to someone recently about Sammy Keys. Now, the newest Sammy Keys that came out, I think the last maybe 2 books, got a little mature. And that's the case with a lot of these series. That happened with Harry Potter. It had definitely happened with Twilight. And so those last books in the series, maybe aren't children's anymore, maybe aren't even teen anymore. And then you want to think about, that happened with the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. Because the last book in the series, she's like having sex with an adult, and yikes. So you really want to think about, what's your policy about that? Normally I'm not like a really hardcore policy person, but I think having some policies will help you when you're deciding about that. So if the last book of the series is too mature, like let's say you have Harry Potter in the children's room and the last book is too mature for the children's room, do you move it to YA? Or do you keep it there? Or do you have copies in both sections? It totally depends. It's totally up to you. You have ultimate control. But these are the things I want you to think about. And it's good to have some rules about these things so that if someone ever came and challenged you, you could say, well, this is the rule, this is the policy in our library. We keep the series together, but if the last book is a little bit more mature, we buy an extra copy for the teen section, or we buy an extra copy for the adult section, whatever. Or maybe your policy is if the books get more mature, even if they belong to a series, we move them to the higher section. Totally up to you. Now, if you're in a library like Page, where your children's and teen sections are really far apart, you want to think about, do you have any duplicates? Like, are you going to buy 2 sets of Harry Potter to put them in each section? It's totally up to you, and it's up to you and your budget. Sometimes you can get these books for free from the book sale or from donations, but you want to think about, is it worth having them in both sections? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? What types of books would be candidates for this? You really want to think about that. So Paige was just saying, and I just lost it. We have a lot of books that are in the children's room because we didn't have a YA section a long time ago that I would no longer have in the children's room, like Speak. That's a really good point. And those are some things you really want to think about. And I know you guys are doing a big building project. When you eventually move your collection, you're going to want to pull those out. So it's a good idea right now for you to start defining your collection and thinking
Sharon,
about those types of books. Yeah.
What if in our position in our library we don't have any say in that?
Then you don't. Then you might want to write down do you have written policies?
I don't know that he has written policies, but he's pretty much, I mean, it's his say.
Okay. Then you might want to do something descriptive if you want something written down, and just so that you can phrase it as you want to be able to describe to parents. And you know what? In your library, since it's so small, it might not make a difference, but it might. So you might want to ask, how do you decide what goes where? And it's really better to have a policy written down than it is to say, well, the director decides, because then you don't really have a leg to stand on in terms of combating challenges. So he might be open to that. If he's not, you can only do what you can do.
Okay.
Okay. So the other thing I want you to think about are your graphic novels. Are they separate? Some libraries have them in a completely separate section. Some libraries interfile them. Some libraries put them under, like, instead of the author, they'll say graphic. So they're kind of like a little subset in there. You want to think about some of your other collections, like nonfiction. And I will say I have pretty strong opinions about nonfiction. I don't like nonfiction YA sections, especially in libraries the size of ours in Vermont. I think it's not necessary, and I also think there's a really big risk of censorship, and I worry about that. Because how do you decide what the teens need and don't need, when in reality they need to have access to the whole library? Now, what the recommendation that I give most people, and feel free to disagree with me, that's completely fine, but what I tend to tell people is interfile them, but put stickers on them that say YA, so that if you have young teens who get overwhelmed, you can say, the ones that have the YA stickers, I bought specifically for teens, so start there. But that way that they have access to everything that's on the shelf. And adults like YA nonfiction too. Just because it's written, for a teen audience doesn't mean it's not a good book. So Paige is saying her YA nonfiction gets buried in the large nonfiction section. It doesn't go out. Yeah, so in Brattleboro, your nonfiction section is enormous. And that's one case I think you could make a really good case for having a separate YA nonfiction section. I completely agree. Those stacks are huge and so confusing and a little creepy, I have to say. So you might want to pull something out. But I want you to think really carefully about making sure that you have you're covering all the different topics, and you're not. I really, really hate YA nonfiction sections that just have things like eating disorders, makeup, and like maybe a graphic novel biography. Like, I really, really hate that. Teens need everything. Teens need all kinds of stuff. They need history. They need religion. They need all kinds of stuff. So be really careful with what you select that goes in there. Mm-hmm.
So just your concern with that would be just like having a more limited non-fiction section that would be featured in the teen area, because we would still have our wide, general non-fiction that anyone could go check out.
Well, I think in your library, I think it's a good option. And especially if you if you put up signs and you remind them all the time that there are more books if they need them in other places. And if you define your collection as, instead of the teen collection, just be like selected teen titles or something like that. Then I think, especially in so Paige has her YA section all the way downstairs, and the children's is like all the way upstairs in a separate part of the building. So it wouldn't make sense it makes sense the way you're doing it, I think. But be really careful. You don't want teens to think that those are the only books they're allowed to read. And you don't want them to think that those are the only books that they're worthy of reading. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess they get so, it's just they're poorly placed within the stacks, and they're very hard to find.
Yeah.
And then I feel like for kids to like go find them, and then like that's, as opposed to having these things featured, like, because we have like some of the really good, nonfiction that was released, like that book Bomb, and that's up there in our nonfiction section, and that's like, we technically categorize that as YA or for teens, but it never goes out because it's up and like Boys in the Boat would be nonfiction technically, and so it would get categorized back there. So, but that it was in the GMBA list, so it's,
right.
I don't know.
Well, sometimes displays can help. Pulling things out as displays and highlighting books like that can help a lot. You want to make sure teens know that they're available. And I think most of the folks here have much smaller nonfiction collections. Yours is big, and I think you're right. I think those books are getting lost, and it's worth looking into separating them. And you might even think about, as you're looking at your building project, whether or not you want to maybe merge with the children's section. It depends. It depends on the age ranges and the staff. And also what they need them for. So nonfiction's tricky, and we're not going to talk about that really in depth, but think about the amount of homework support you're doing. In general, the trend is people in public libraries are doing less and less homework support. So if you're not doing a lot of homework support, you may not need a huge nonfiction section. And I know that makes some of us sad, like me. Sarah made a good point. Duplication is sometimes necessary. Sometimes you need to buy multiple copies of books like Bomb. I know. It's something to think about when you're looking at your budget. Okay, we have 2 minutes, so let me just go through your assignment this week. So I did not get assignments from everybody, and I'm going to tell you right now, you guys are getting 12 credits for this workshop, and I'm going to start docking hours for people who don't do their homework. I'm sorry, I just have to. I don't like it. So unless something terrible happens, which I'm a softie. If your dog dies or you get sick, whatever, just tell me. But if I don't get an assignment from you by the Tuesday following the due date, then I'm going to start docking hours, and it'll be 1 hour per assignment. Okay. So you've been warned. So this week's assignment, you're going to make a list of all the materials that you'd like, the types of materials, not all the materials, all the types of materials you want for teens in your library. And this is a wish list, okay? So think about what you would really like to have. Think outside the book box, think about magazines, think about graphic novels, video games, think about what your kids would really like and what they would benefit from. Then you're going to make a list of the sources that you're going to use to find these materials. And I want you to annotate that list with just a little bit about pros and cons. What are the things you're going to think about when you read these reviews? And those sources, too, can be awards lists. That's no problem. Then I want you to write a paragraph about your budget. What can you afford right this second? What are your immediate priorities? What's your wish list? What if somebody, comes and gives you $1,000 and says, hey, you need to buy something? Wish lists are really important to have in your back pocket. So what would you do? How would you make a case for a larger budget? What would you tell that person? And use some of those things that you used in your first assignment, the number of kids, the demand. You really want to make a good case for why you would put more money into this. And then where would you put that money if it was an actual budget increase, not just a gift, a budget increase? Where would you allocate those funds? And also think about how often you buy books. I know some people only buy books once a year, which makes me nervous because, you know, publishing happens all year long and there are big publishing pushes in the fall. It definitely during the holidays and then again before summer. So you really want to, you know, make sure that you're thinking about that and think about when the awards lists are published. Our Vermont awards lists are published in March. So that's when you'll know what's on those lists. And definitely think about the age range. I really want you to define your age range for your space. And then think about your space. Where will these things go? Will they be interfiled? Will they be separate? Where your duplicate's going to be. So this is a lot to think about, not a ton to write. And really try to get your assignment in by Friday, please. So I don't have to end up reading and grading things over the weekend because you like me, right? All right, guys, I'm going to stop the recording right now.